We're back out here once again, and today we're talking about some super simple baits and presentations that get really big bites when that water gets really cold. And spoiler alert, none of them are a jerkbait. Stick around, we're going to talk all about it. Got him. Oh, that's a good one. Stay on. And here is this video's featured comment. Congratulations! If you would like to have a chance to have your comment featured in an upcoming video, all you've got to do is leave a comment. And now, on with the video. Welcome back to Lowbrow Fishing. And as you can see, it's still pretty chilly even here in South Mississippi. And strangely enough, it's going to be this way for at least the next week or so. This has got to be one of the longest cold snaps I can ever remember in my 40 years living in the Deep South. So, obviously, that's going to affect the fishing in a number of ways. Normally, we can just tie on a jerkbait, various size, various depths, and we can work it slowly in the water. That's what everybody's doing now. And I'm not saying that a jerkbait isn't a great presentation, because it really is. Now, if you're going to throw a jerkbait, there's a chance that you're going to be catching some nice fish, a very good chance. However, a lot of times that jerkbait, like any other type of presentation, that bite will dry up. And we need to have a plan B. We always talk about having a plan B. So we need to have some other alternatives that we want to tie on and we want to use. And a lot of times, well, it's to go as finessey and as subtle as we possibly can. Now, in the last video, we talked about how those bass are not willing to go out as far to seek prey. Their strike zone, as we say, has reduced considerably. So we need to take that in consideration whenever we're picking our presentations. It's one of the reasons why a suspending jerkbait can be so effective, because it just hangs there in the water, allowing those slower bass to catch up to it. Now, another great presentation along those lines, obviously, is going to be something like a soft plastic jerkbait. And this is just a standard cream soft plastic jerkbait. You guys know I love these cheap things. I've caught so many fish on them, you know, $1.25, $1.30, whatever they are for a pack of them at Walmart. They might be super cheap. They might be stiff as a board, but they catch fish. And I don't know what it is about them, but the fish in my area and all the fisheries that I use and all the fisheries that I frequent, they love these things. It's not just a big lake or a little lake or a hatchet lake thing. No matter where I go, they get devoured. So give these a try. And if you have a preference for another brand, something like a Strike King Caffeine Shad is an amazing soft plastic jerkbait, and it's a completely different type of presentation from that cream style. That Caffeine Shad has a very soft tail, it's got a very soft body, and it tends to slither through the water a bit more, and it has a different type of ride. So not only try a soft plastic jerkbait, but also experiment with the different brands and use different retrieves. One of the good things about it being so cold is that water gets like glass. It clears up so much. You can see right to the bottom. So you can see, a lot of times you can see your bait from a long distance away, and you can use that to, well, work on your presentation, work on your technique. Maybe you're going too fast. Rarely in the wintertime are we going too slow. But use that to work on your technique, and you'll find that a soft plastic jerkbait can really get those big bites. It doesn't matter if it's super, super cold. A lot of times that bait will hover there in the water because of how cold that water is. It will become, instead of a slow sinker, almost like a suspender, and it will sit there, and we can use that to generate some really nice strikes. You guys know that I've caught so many fish on them doing that. It's a great presentation, and it's a good starting point, because from here we're going to be going even more subtle, and a lot of cases even more small, to some places that are probably going to be incredibly surprising. Now, another type of bait we've been talking about a lot lately is a small swim bait, right? Just a lowbrow rig, just a small 1/4 ounce jig with the skirt off of it. I use this in really grassy waters and a lot of thick vegetation, but a regular type of swim bait head will work if you don't have so much trash that you need to bring your swim bait through. But I'm using a very small swim bait. I have reduced the size. If I can go down to 3 inches, that's what I'm doing. I'm going to go down to that 3-inch swim bait. And this is, obviously, this is that Rapala Crush City. This is the Mayor. I really like these things. But Keitech, Rage Swimmer, whatever your favorite brand is, put it on a 1/4 ounce jig and fish it very, very slowly. Just a nice, easy, steady retrieve. And you'll be amazed at not just the number of strikes that you're getting, but how hard those cold bass are inhaling that bait. It'll be choked 9 times out of 10. And when given the opportunity, those bass will violently strike their baits. It doesn't matter how cold that water is. It can be an immensely powerful strike, and it'll be no doubter. And as you're fighting that bass back to the boat, and you'll see a lot of times those bass have actually choked that bait. So don't sleep on a little bitty swim bait. Now, we've talked about those before. Now we're going to get into a range of baits I really don't talk about that much because they're not presentations that I use normally, but I've been coming to where I'm using them more and more. And that is, well, a little Ned, right? This is a little Bass Pro Shops Ned bait. Now, this is the type that I like for my fishery because it's got that teardrop head and it's got that line tie that's right in line with the hook point. That helps me out on my vegetated fisheries. We've got so much hydrilla, so much grass and milfoil that this is what I need. And believe it or not, I'm actually Texas rigging these on here when I'm using a lot of different types of presentations. Now, I'm not just using Ned baits. I've actually gone down to using panfish baits, like this little crawl right here. And believe it or not, I think I bought this at Dollar General. I think this was in a little pack of baits that I got from Dollar General one time. And this thing has gotten munched. They have totally been obliterating that little bait. And it was great because I've been experimenting with it. Because the jerk bait bite wasn't on, the spy bait bite wasn't really there. They wanted something small. They wanted something tiny. That's what they were willing to chase. So obviously I went down to a little bitty net head, fishing it on a spinning combo, light line, little bitty finesse setup with a 7-foot medium power rod and 10-pound braid to an 8-pound co-poly leader. That's what was working for me. And I was still able to work a lot of that thick vegetation simply because of the shape of that bait. I had these Texas rigged on there, so it came through nice and easily. And it was kind of funny because those bass were slamming that little craw bait. Now, I could do it with a piece of worm. I would cut a Senko in half. For me, that's what I prefer to use if I'm using what you would normally think of as a Ned bait, right? When you normally picture a Ned bait, you think of a little piece of a worm. So if I've got a Senko that maybe is blown out from earlier in the day, then I'll cut it in half and I'll use that as a Ned bait. I'm not going to use a Senko or a stick bait that's been used up for weeks now because a lot of times the scent is gone, the texture's all wrong, and the bass just aren't going to be interested in it. But if it's something that I used earlier in the day and it's been blown out a little bit, I'll cut that tip off. I'll cut it in half and I'll use that as a Ned bait. But then there was another presentation that I was able to do. And I've been holding on to this for quite a while, and it worked so well. When I went out to the big lake just yesterday, almost every single bite I got, with the exception of 2, which I got on that Ned rig setup, I got on this setup. And it is, well, it is a little pre-rigged. Well, it's not pre-rigged, but it's a little jig head. It's a 1/8 ounce, kind of like at bullet weight, but it's on a worm hook, just a regular worm hook like you would use for regular Texas rig bass fishing. And this actually worked better because I was able to put this Googan Kraken Crawl on here. Again, we're going small. I liked these smaller baits, but I noticed that the craw bite was on. I noticed the craw bite was on a lot more than they were chasing bait balls because What happens when it gets cold? Well, those bass, a lot of them will go deeper. They may not go as super far from the bank. They're not going to go way out into the middle of the lake where they came from, but they will creep down deeper. And even when they're near the bank, they tend to hug the bottom. They're going to be closer to the bottom. So that's why I started using those bottom bouncing techniques. Even something like a Ned rig, I wanted to keep it down near the bottom. And that's how I was fishing it. I was fishing it down near the bottom, keeping that bait with that bottom contact. It came right through the vegetation with no problem. And I'm telling you what, I had to wade through some dinks. I had to wade through some quarter pounders and some half pounders, but I was still getting bites. And I put it together that if the little bass were eating craw, then maybe the bigger bass were eating craw too. And I was able to hook into a couple of more decent fish in that pound, pound and a quarter, even a pound and a half range. So putting it all together, I realized the jerkbait bite wasn't working because those bass were lower in the water. And even though they could see that jerkbait just a few feet above them, they were not interested in chasing it. That goes back to what we were talking about, how that strike zone was shrinking down. So I decided I was going to go down to where they were. And I did that by using little Ned rigs and that pre-rigged, that pre-weighted worm hook jig, for lack of a better term, that I put those small craws on there. And I went through a pack of craws. I started catching them like crazy when I adjusted how I was doing it. So keep that in mind. Whenever you're fishing in the winter, it doesn't always have to be about the jerkbait. Sometimes you need to go down where those fish are hiding out. So there you have it. Some simple, easy to use, smaller presentations to get those hard bites whenever the water's cold. Next time that jerkbait bite has dried up for you, consider maybe going a little bit deeper in the water column just to see if those bass maybe have dropped down some. A lot of times, whenever you go lower and you go a little bit smaller, you can be surprised at the amount of bites you get, even on the most cold and windy days. Thanks for watching Lowbrow Fishing. We'll catch you in the next one.